welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Tamar, and today, Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp once again joins the show, this time to discuss Ridley Scott's Napoleon. Following Napoleon's rise and fall throughout his troublesome career, a lot of people have found mixed results in Napoleon, but as big fans of Ridley Scott, are me and Jack more positive, or are we also quite mixed on Scott's newest effort? Find out today on ClapperCast.
General,
we are discovered. Good.
Wait! Nice! It's a trap! Retreat!
I'm not built like other men.
Okay, Jack, I know we're both pretty big Ridley Scott fans. I'm going to start us off today, though, because I was really excited for this. Specifically, I think back to 2 years ago or a couple years back with the double release of The Last Duel and House of Gucci. Specifically, kind of with House of Gucci, Ridley Scott is in this era of camp, of comedy, of humor, mixing that with drama in a way that, like, I'm really drinking the Kool-Aid. I remember with House of Gucci, I think you're also pretty deep in the Kool-Aid with me, so that's good. I think, like, you watch that movie and I think, like, it's just so, I appreciate what he's doing with, like, Paulo Gucci and how he turns that from, like, being an absolute funny buffoon into, like, a really tragic character. So, like, with Napoleon going into it, I'm drinking the Ridley Scott Kool-Aid. I was excited for this film. I saw it at 10 a.m. in a truly, like, traumatizingly cold theater, to the point where, like, it was awful. But the film itself, I'm mixed on, but I think I'm definitely mixed positive. I think a lot of people are struggling to vibe with this era of, like, Ridley Scott writing. I'm not necessarily one of those people. Just very quickly, this film goes through pretty much Napoleon's entire career, but a lot of the time it blends this more deep, complex look at this figure, his intentions, what he values, his ego, his quest for power, with these very comedic, very over-the-top, very campy scenes. And for a lot of people, that's a warring ideal. It's very hard to accept that there's something of layered and something of value here when he's screaming that you think you're so great because you have boats. Or, like, lines like that, or there's a really, funny sex scene in here also. I think a lot of people are just seeing the comedy and just seeing that tone and then saying it totally goes against or it undercuts the deeper drama. For me, it did not. I think this is still, when you boil it down, as a package, there are definitely issues. I would not say this is a flawless film, but I would say that there's still a really worthy look here at a man consumed with ego who loses himself to his own lore. I think Joaquin Phoenix does a really great job. Vanessa Kirby is untouchable per usual, though I think she could be used better. This is a film just lightly starting off. I don't think it's Ridley Scott's best work, but I'm not seeing where everyone is saying there's such a disaster in this film. At least in my circle, people are really hating on this movie. But I think that's just because I am someone who's vibing with what Ridley Scott is delivering, blending these two sides of filmmaking, to where I found this to be enjoyable. Jack, I know you are literally 25 probably minutes out of your screening of Napoleon, which I cannot imagine going in that raw. But what are your initial thoughts, fresh thoughts on Ridley Scott's Napoleon?
So apologies for the sort of the scatter shot. So I've been trying to digest this as soon as I've left the theatre. And just like you've said beforehand, I'm a huge Ridley Scott fan. I have been always since Gladiator. But I'm sort of the type of, I like Ridley Scott when he's hitting big and also hitting small. I love a good year. I think it's incredible. Marion Cotillard, Albert Finney, Russell Crowe, I think it's outstanding. I also like his attempts at the Alien sequels. I'm not someone who's like who'll just kiss his ass. I think The Counselor, the director's cut, which will be important to talk about this later, is a really nihilistic viewpoint of a film, and I think it's quite an incredible thing. Kingdom of Heaven, I love. There's a Prometheus. Robin Hood is fun. So he's had some big hits for me, some near misses. I watched 2 of his films before this to leading up to it. I watched The Duelists and I watched Someone Watch Over Me. One of his best, one of his worst. So we'll get that towards the end. I need one more film now. It's Thelma and Louise, and I'm done. So going into this is quite big for me because sooner rather than later, and we've talked about this with Scorsese, we'll stop going to films like this with Ridley Scott directed on it. So it's a bit bittersweet, but I'm very much like you in the sense of I feel in a very similar sentiment. This is not one of his best attempts at crafting a historical epic. There's a lot that goes into this, and there's a lot left on the cutting room floor, I can imagine. Um, for the most part, I quite enjoyed this. There's a lot here, a lot of tone, a lot of narrative, a lot of character, um, juggled very vicariously. There's a lot here that I think he just gets away with. I'm very much like you. I enjoyed it, but I think I might enjoy it a bit more than you in different ways. I think I've sort of peeled it out of my head when I was driving home about what he's tried to project here. And like you, going into this, I read a few reviews and it was like 5 stars from the Guardian. Peter Bradshaw was like, "That's shocking," and then a lot of it was just like 3 star, 3 star, 3 star. And you always know you're in Ridley territory. House of Gucci was all 3 stars, Last Duel, so I got slightly on my hopes up. And then, I read another review that said Joaquin Phoenix's character of Napoleon was an unbalanced performance, and I was like, that's a strange way to sort of make a point of a Napoleon, the actual character Napoleon. So going into this, it's interesting to see Joaquin Phoenix's performance in Gladiator and here, because Gladiator is about naivety. This is all about ego. And I think he's quite good here. I think Vanessa Kirby's good as well. I wanted to go into this, and I wanted Jodie Comer, who she was meant to play Empress Josephine as well. I think that still would have been a better interpretation because I think Jodie Comer's phenomenal. I think she's yet to even blow up, which is incredible because in this country she's had her roses and more. She's outstanding. Vanessa Kirby I've been very cold on. I think I didn't really like her in the Mission Impossible sequels, and she's not necessarily an actress that I've warmed to because I haven't seen enough. I'm going to try watch Italian Studies whenever it comes available to see her a little bit more. But for the most part, I enjoyed this. It's not one of his best. It's nowhere near one of his worst. It's definitely purposely a cold, stoic film. There's meant to be comedic places in here to showcase how much of a buffoon this man is, and I think people are laughing weirdly enough in the wrong places. I felt in my theatre. Not that I'm in the right, they're in the wrong. I don't know if you felt the same, but there was a lot of like obvious comedic moments, and then there was quite subtle comedic moments of layered peel back the onion and showcase who this person really was, and no one really got it. And I was just sort of like chuckling to myself, thinking, I think Ridley Scott's got one over on us here. I remember before going into this film, people were like, he's dismantling people already going into it, which is a bad sign. But I think when he said that Napoleon wasn't there, Marie Antoinette's um, uh, I wouldn't say assassination, no, but when she was there in a public killing, beheading, very fresh. Sorry. Um, I think there's actually quite a subtle dig there that he's in that scene. This film is from the perspective of a man who is an egotistical nightmare who believes it is his destiny to rule the world, having absolutely no credibility to do so, took everything by his own accord without going through any sort of systematic or democratic values. This is a film that purposely puts forward a very sick and also what's the term here? A narrative that can't be trusted. There's a certain terminology. I don't know if you've got it on the end of your tongue.
Unreliable narrative.
Yeah, I think that's the perspective this film is, and I don't know why it hasn't gone down that route. Perhaps because they don't want to flood the gateways of upsetting French historians or just the manic press. But that's the sort of ideology I went into this with. Even from the first scene, I was like, we're watching someone's attempt at constructing a favourable viewpoint of their own, done through narration towards the end, which I thought gave the game away even more so that it's him recollecting to himself that he's never in the man of defeat. He says at the end, but with his it's about the other people's failures, not your own. And even at the end, he's mistreating the idea of history before him about the French and the Prussians or the Russians at the time burning down Moscow. Who did it? It's his perspective of it all. So I think this is a really layered feature in that regard. I will say one thing just before we move on to you. I feel like we're going through 2005 again here. I think this is his theatrical cut of Kingdom of Heaven. A very simplistic, not terrifically layered, but layered enough action historical epic that's got another hour or maybe an hour and a half left on the cook floor. That's what 4 hours of the roadshow version of Fox's Kingdom of Heaven. I think this is just him appeasing the masses. I think what's yet to come will be the definitive picture. But for the most part, I enjoyed this. Very very different in tone to House of Gucci. Interesting enough, symmetrical consistencies like the Duelists and the Last Duel and Kingdom of Heaven, but Yeah, I enjoyed this for the most part. I'm surprised it's getting very lukewarm reviews. I think Joaquin Phoenix is incredible here.
I mean, I'd be pretty like hard pressed to argue against anything you say. I wonder if like our fans are bored whenever they see it's us on a podcast because they're like, yeah, they're just going to agree. Um, I agree that the 4 hour cut is probably there as far as the comparatives between this and Kingdom of Heaven. I will say I think it's somewhat depressing. You mentioned the reaction to this and people not quite getting it. I think there's a few things. Like number one, I'll get if I guess like I don't really care about historical accuracy in films. It's a movie, it's a film, cinema. I don't
Yeah,
like
agreed.
personally care. Valid, everyone. I know Alina Fald, friend of the podcast, walked out of this yesterday and sent basically a historical thesis on why it was all wrong historically. And I know that's a big hurdle for her and Ridley Scott. So, like, peace and love, valid, everyone. I'll say that's not a wall for me. But I do think it's frustrating, and not to like down talk anyone who dislikes this film, but I think there are a large portion of the audience who just like see this colder, more bleak, almost 3 hour historical drama and just naturally with its slower pacing just like checks out for some reason. I think it's a
Yeah,
shift in audience, which I think really frustrating because like there is a lot here to engage with. And like even you mentioned what this is like kind of going for in its bigger swings and bigger purposes. I think when you see the end text that they end on and what they choose to focus on, which is how many people died in these battles, this is very clearly looking at the real world consequences of ego. Like it's definitely very clearly in there looking at what happens when someone has this power, when someone convinces the world they have this power, convinces key players that they can do this, and then get lucky in some battles, have good battles, that ego and that legend grows and grows. And then you just have that Waterloo segment where it's just like it all falls apart in front of him. And he just sees everything he worked towards, all of his legacy, all of his like, belief in himself that he was something more just kind of fade. And it's like this wonderful once you get through all this film to get to that segment. um and then of course you get the end where he basically refuses to take blame, and it's just
yeah,
like I don't know, it's a very complex view of Napoleon that I think is very worthy. I don't get when people go to this film and say there's just nothing, but I think also then like the moments of comedy do work because as you mentioned, you want to show him as a buffoon, you want to show him as kind of an idiot because like he is, that is the point of the film in a lot of ways. But people are just refusing, or maybe I mean like again, I don't want to down talk and be like, oh, you just didn't get it, like the cool kids
yeah,
over here, but like I do see that there's something here, and I find it curious that so many people are just immediately rejecting this. And I think
yeah.
a lot of it just comes due to the package it comes into. Also, maybe they just dislike Ridley Scott going into interviews and saying he doesn't care about historical accuracy. But like, I don't know. I think I look at that and like, oh, he's funny. I like Scott. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Again, I would be hard pressed to argue with you. I also think that you know this is what I quite like about this film because I think he's playing both games here. He's playing for an audience for an international level with trying to balance action, drama, just like your cinematic conventions. Really, just to enamor an audience in 2.5 hours, he's gonna find it tough. And also, I think he's playing devil's advocate by trying to elevate the material to something a bit deeper if you're looking for it. I think all mid tier um, Scott vehicles always try to do that, and I think you can ostracize one, sorry, and ostracize the other by doing that. So I do understand what he's trying to do, and also he's going to streaming later on, so he knows that he's going to get some audience viewership. So the fact that it hits 50 million opening weekend, fair play to him. So I can understand that. That being said, I think he's a director. Granted, as well, just about the tone. You know, I've noticed that people laughing, like you said, when he says, "Oh, like you think you're so special because you have boats," and he storms off, and people see that at face value. But we're also talking about the consul from France to England that are going to heat up to have a battle where all these casualties are going, and that's essentially your leader acting like a petulant child. And again in Moscow when they're saying who set the fire, and they're saying they did, and he's got his hands over his ears like a child having like a pulling a mooder. I mean, these are all purposeful actions to showcase how much of a child this man was. He couldn't accept responsibility, but ultimately accepted accountability. Even then, I think that's debatable. But I think he accepted the glory, but none of the guts. I mean, how the perspective of the film changes when we see him in the midst of lining up, going into battle, especially the first and the last scene echo each other wonderfully. In that he runs into the first bit, like ultimately gassed, knowing that I don't know what I'm doing, and then you have that at the end when he ultimately does the same thing. This is a character who has not learned. within 20 years, and just has not learned from his mistakes. Ego, just riding ego. The other thing I think about people being quite distant from, and I don't know if you agree with this, but for me, and this is where this might be sort of going against my my own people, of course. But I'm from the north of England, where different types of people emotionally to a lot of other people, where we're very stoic. We say it how it is, and there's very difficulty of a generational gap where there's emotion shown. So my parent generation, the generation above that, they don't show emotion like our generation do. And I think Ridley Scott's from that generation of going through a war. His father worked for the English army, and his mother was like a tyrant. Like if you read I think it's a Vanity Fair interview, it's really wonderful stuff. Like they always say that one character is based on her, and this one's Napoleon, which I think is quite funny. And I think he's a quite stoic, cold character to begin with. Very dry sense of humor in his interviews. Like you've just said, like, well, fuck the French, they don't even like themselves. I mean, that's just typical British. I mean, he's also from the South Shields. He's a Geordie, he's Newcastle, or Newcastle, as they pronounce it there. So he's got a very morbid, dry sensibility. And I think this film echoes that a lot. And I think it's dangerous because you can ostracize a certain type of audience, as I mentioned beforehand. But whoever gets that gets it. I think that's wonderful because it's like a little fan club. I know that's strange to say, but it's like a little echo chamber, which is quite nice. And slowly but surely, like most of Scott's work, grows with decades to come. I think Blade Runner's a cold film, quite literally. I think tonally it's cold. I think thematically it's cold. It's almost nihilistic. The Counselor, cold. Kingdom of Heaven, cold. There are all these films that are very morbid in the sense of, he's famous for never having any sex scenes because he'd rather do it than watch it in a film. This is the type of person we're talking about. And so I can understand his sentiments and his ideology of tone. So it's interesting that when you do see comedies, I always find it really interesting to sort of double cross that and have a look at it again. And I think there's a lot going on here, like you said. But however, to that degree, I think it does push away quite a lot of people. I mean, there's a sequence when he goes to visit Josephine, and she's at the pond, and it's like we've got her in the foreground. In the background, we've got two swans, and as Napoleon walks to her, they divide, they go away. I mean, it's like it could never be more clear as day. Like he's so on the nose, Ridley Scott. It's unbelievable. That doesn't mean that it's not an interesting film, but I think that it is very much matter of fact. I don't know if you agree, but this film is very matter of fact from the beginning to the end. There's no great detail of thinking for let the audience to think or feel. It's very much, this was what Napoleon did here. This is what Napoleon did here. And I don't know how you wrestled with this. I thought that would be very interesting to do with Joaquin Phoenix because he's incredibly method, reading reviews 10 days before the shoot. He had no idea what to do. And for an actor of that caliber to sort of try find a character working with Scott who just like wants it done, come on, we can do this. I thought the melding together was good, very good. I didn't think it was outstanding, but I thought it was really good. So it'd be interesting to see what's left on that cutting room floor, as mentioned beforehand. But a very interesting set of tone that will work for and against it. I don't know how you felt as well, but we having to do Hunger Games last week, and it being the same length, I thought this was a breeze. I really did. I thought it was a breeze to watch. Quite fun, but very stoic, very grey, very mundane. Pushed you away a lot, which was difficult to do on occasion. Not as emotional as I thought it would be. I really wanted it to be a set piece or something quite engaging. But overall, like you said, very stoic. So I'd be shocked if this because I know it's beating projections, but I'd be very shocked if it had a second wind. I think it'll have a big downfall next. But I can't imagine anyone who doesn't find a vague interest in Ridley Scott, Joaquin Phoenix, or Napoleon to even entertain this. That's what I thought, and my audience reflected that in my theatre as well. I don't know about yours.
Well, I saw like a press screen, so it was quite limited. I know it was rather.
I went to go watch it with the normals. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm the Napoleon here, and you're the peasant on the street.
No. I'm going to the slaughter with the British. It's an irony. I do see it
for sure. I thought Phoenix was really good here. Maybe it's because I just like haven't liked a lot of Phoenix's recent work. When you look at Joker and Beau is Afraid, and just like, he's not necessarily been doing the projects I connect with. I thought he was really good here. I do agree. I feel like it kind of felt like he needed, like, he doesn't really have that scene for me where it's that emotional input that or output where it's that emotional climax of his character where he really gets like that quote unquote Oscar scene. I would say he's definitely a really good performance. He is not in like my best of the year contenders, let's say. I wouldn't like put him in my personal lineup, but he is quite good here. Um, I think that overall, I just like well acted though. I mean, Vanessa Kirby again. Like I believe. Have you seen Pieces of a Woman?
No.
That's a pretty good Vanessa Kirby
Right.
performance. Definitely better than Italian studies, I would say.
Right. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely like a very cold film, but I didn't mind that. Again, you mentioned Ridley Scott. I think like you look at House of Gucci, an incredibly cold film. You look at Last Duel, obviously a very
Yeah.
incredibly cold film. I have no issues with that. I do think like I think there is room for a little bit more color here and there. We mentioned recently with one of the films we were talking about, I forget which one, but we mentioned how you could use color to really for a great effect. I feel like he probably could have done something there. But I am excited to see the 4 hour cut. I will say the one thing you mentioned that it's very just seeing Napoleon and matter of fact. The one thing that you can have a conversation if you don't necessarily know the lore of Napoleon with yourself is kind of viewing like, is because he does act like a child, right? That's the point. But
Mhm.
like, is he a genius? Is he just a complete idiot? And then you can kind of wrestle with that if you want to, if you don't know how everything goes down. And then I think you obviously get an answer towards the end. But yeah, I mean, pretty like good. Um, yeah, the runtime also. I'll say the runtime like flew. I thought there was another hour to this film.
Oh wow.
The one thing that bothered me with the editing, with the narrative, is I think sometimes the time jumps can be a little jarring because it doesn't really
Oh,
tell you
we'll
when
get to
there's a
that.
time
Yeah.
jump, and you will be walking through Napoleon in a conversation, and you'll be like, "Oh, he just met her," and then they'll be like, "Oh, actually, it's been a year, or
Mhm.
we've been married for a year," and it's like, "Oh, okay, I guess that's happening." That's the one point where I feel like the film started to kind of get a little jumbled for me when it comes to the edit. I don't know if you had the similar issue with
I
that.
mean,
Um,
the white fades. Why? What a horrible choice to do that, and it was predominantly the first act. I felt. I think it did sneak into the second, but the white fade was such a horrible aesthetic choice from someone who's quite diligent with his edits, especially in his director's cuts, and he makes monsters of films. Exodus, Gods of Kings, again, a very cold film, but white fades just like that seemed to just engulf the screen and cut away into which felt like it could just harsh cut into things. I thought that was a very strange choice. I hope that's eradicated in this next version, and I feel like that would only presume to me that most of that hour cut is on the first and second act. I think the third act we get is probably what we get. I agree with you about the Vanessa Kirby thing and Joaquin Phoenix not having that scene. I felt like there was one attempt at it where he goes back to Josephine's villa and speaks to her daughter, and it's all that it's shot quite in close ups, very quite I'd say tonally rich as well, very emotive, very emotional. They both just sat very stoic, and they're just talking to each other, and he blows up, and then he's wiping his tears, and I was just hoping that we would get some sort of candid nature to it. And again, that might be the projection of a character that just can't condone the fact that someone's failed him. I didn't really think it nailed that element, so I put that to one side. But equally, I didn't think it sort of just enraptured me as well, and that also that story arc just ended as well. I thought that we were going to get some sort of quite interesting developments there because we get a look who's in that room and just nothing came of it. Very quick, very easy. There we go. Again, maybe an issue of the edit, but definitely suffered from it. But again, I think Phoenix is good here. I agree with you. I don't think he'll be on that top 10 list. Even if he'll be very much bottom of the barrel. I don't think we'll be having a talk about him in February whatsoever, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. I think he has made some very interesting choices. I haven't seen Beau is Afraid yet. I know we've spoken about it. I'm going to watch that and Bones is All this week. I promise. But I agree with you. I think he's taken some very interesting choices the last few years. We need to push himself out there. Again, working with Lynn Ramsey as well, which we'll talk about toward the end. I think he's definitely chosen to ostracize himself for Hollywood in an attempt. And then because of Joker, slightly being drawn back into it, which is going to be interesting with whatever they do next. But I prefer him when he's really going for something, and I think here there's an attempt to showcase the banal aspect to a human being. And it's interesting when you said about him being a genius or just an idiot. I just think a lot of what he did was unprecedented. I think being exiled twice is like you read about now and you think what like what like you just it's very difficult to comprehend it. But he walks through France. He lands on France like he owns the place. Like you think he rightfully does. It really does grasp that ideology of a man utterly in contempt of everything else but himself. I think it really did well to echo that. But the problem with that, it's very difficult to find immersion and emotive engagement and influence with the type of character who essentially, if you're not a narcissist, does begin to repel you. I never found that there was anything here to sort of showcase that he was a character that could be saved anywhere. I think he made his own decisions, even when he's in the Plymouth, the ship. He's full on that bullshit journey, isn't he? He's on that train. He's going nowhere with it, but he's still believing it. So it did really keep on that onus of him being a character who was very self entitled and gave very little nuance to it, which I thought was quite good. But he's nothing without Vanessa Kirby in this film. Ironically enough, internally it's also mentioned, but he is nothing. Joaquin Phoenix is nothing without this film. She is boisterous. She is devilish. She says so much without saying anything. And I'll be honest, I wanted to go in this and be like, I wanted Jodie Comer in this, so I've got a little bit of skin in the game. But I thought she was incredible. She externally showcased everything on an internal level. I love when actors do that, not having to express oneself through words, but through vision. Oh, honestly, I was like handing out like I was like it was amazing to watch. I think she was incredible. I felt like she was underused, but again, there's a name on the title. We'll go for that. But for essentially 2.5 hours, she takes a good chunk of it, and she does rule the roost. There's a lot there that's probably let to be said in terms of her story arc, and all I can think of, and I don't know about you, but when this hit its second act, I did think this would make a better miniseries. I really did. When they got to Russia, I just thought like we're really sort of pushing the boundary. We're just moving on incredibly. And from that moment to his first exile was like that. Very strange how it just moved on from narration. But again, always engaged, always encaptured in it, went like a breeze, which is so shocking to know that there's going to be 2 hours, to 1 hour and a half ready to go. But like you said, there's very little here where I thought I was underwhelmed. I did think though that the score was a bit like we're going to have something here because I quite like James Newton Howard's score to Kingdom of Heaven, obviously Vangelis with Blade Runner, and even The Last Duel and stuff like that. There's been a lot to watch, but here was just wasn't much there for me. But other than that,
Yeah.
again, it constantly engaged me. I wasn't ever checking the watch or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that if that extra time comes from the beginning of the film, I think it's going to be helpful because I do agree that romance, it kind of funnily enough reminds me of the other Apple TV Plus original kind of we're talking about, Killers of the Flower Moon, where like there's an
What?
attempt there to show the power of romance, but I don't think that it fully like bleeds out to be the powerful statement, the poignant statement that it wants to make. I can see similar parallels here. So hopefully, especially if that time is them developing a relationship, having more screen time together, I would support that.
Mhm.
You want Comer? I think I watch every female performance pretty much and say I want it to be Jodie Comer. So
Yes.
I think I have that bias just in general. If anyone
Yeah.
has not seen the 2021 double feature of both, obviously Last Duel, but also Help, I think it's
Yeah.
called. It's a
Wow.
smaller feature, but fucking incredible. Like
Yeah.
Jodie Comer, queen. I will say one thing that really I did really like in the film is the action sequences. There's obviously a great scale here. There's obviously a great size. Maybe it's because we don't really get them anymore. But whenever there's like a film that just has an epic size like that, and there's just hundreds of people on screen, granted with visual effects and everything in there too. It was one thing like in Babylon. Weirdly, I just remember sitting in the theater and just being like, "Wow, I love that there's so many people. Like it's such a scale and
Mhm.
size that you don't see anymore. It carries some weight. Here, it's incredibly gory at times, especially towards animals. There is some
Oh yeah.
scenes where like a horse just gets shot and just like, and it's quite hard to watch even at points. But I thought that was really important also just to keep adding. And again, at the end, they tie back into the bodies lost. Because we're ultimately this is a look at the inner workings of this man and this figure, who also like, yes, he is delusional about how his power, but like it does get him to be the king, right? Like it does get him very far distances. And when he returns to France, it's great when he kisses the soil immediately, but then he goes and he gets stopped by the guards trying to stop him. And there's a great, if you read into it, I recommend anyone go to their Wikipedia page for Napoleon and just like read it. I did, and it was like fantastic. But there's one guy who was like, who promised the queen or the king, there's this quote that was like, I'm going to serve his head on like a platter for you. And then he immediately like joins forces with Napoleon. Like there is like that ego, yes, while funny, yes, while kind of like pathetic, like there is a real weight to it, right? Where like he is getting these mass forces to believe in him, ultimately to, tragedy. And again, that's the point of showing the violence and showing the ending there, with the amount of bodies lost. um yeah, I think like that is where like, and I think that's what people don't get about Scott. And like, I don't know, not to turn this into a House of Gucci podcast, but that's what they don't get about like Paulo Gucci. Yes, he's funny. Yes, he's Jared Leto. Why? But like, then you see what that did to him, and that ruined his life, right? Like it took everything from him. And then that's where like the venom of Ridley Scott is best, where it kind of sneaks up on you, and then you just like, oh, actually this isn't fun because it really had these devastating effects. Granted, that's on a singular life of someone who's rich. This is on thousands and thousands and thousands of bodies. But that's like why this story is so impactful. This story of egos, not just because, oh lol, Napoleon's funny and he lost a war. It's because it had real consequences for those bodies. And I think that focus from Scott is very crucial here into giving the film a purpose, giving the film a gravitas. And I don't really get how that doesn't connect to people more, but alas.
Yeah, I think just on the gore, I strange little caveat here, but go with me. I went to go see my dad yesterday after work, and he was watching. I got the last 20 minutes of the 2008 Rambo when he's on the machine gun, and I've seen that film like 4 times in my life, and even then I was watching, I think this is like really pushing the boundaries of what you can get away with, and even I thought that was like gory to beyond belief. So I'm in the theater for this. The first act, when he's running, and you have this like you have this projection, this idea that he's gonna run into battle, he's gonna be the savior, and you hear the cannon go off, and it just destroys his horse. I generally was like audibly, there's a lot of shock value here. There's a lot of sound design where we just watch the end of a rifle, bang, someone's head gets blown off. It doesn't shy away from that at all. It really doesn't shy away from the atmosphere. And again, like you said about the battle sequences, he's rolling with 11 cameras at once. Like this guy's god in cinema. I think if Kubrick was alive now and saw Ridley Scott shoot Napoleon, I don't think Stanley Kubrick could probably do the same. And granted, I'm not conflating the talent there. I just think that what Ridley Scott does as a visionary with his camera work doesn't leave anything to chance. And those battlefields, and I think specifically in Waterloo, how he positions the camera, we see the scale, but we also see the scope of what's there. But we also get the performance, we get the rivalry, everything's there. I think the last 20 minutes of this film perfectly encapsulates what this feature is really about. It's about warring with oneself, having to war against another, and having absolutely no reconciliation with conscience, wrestling with the fact that you're just going to throw these boys to war. Innocent people as well, just terrible stuff. But also, again, like you said, there very much is a very atmospheric look at all this film. It looks quite warm in some sequences. He's very much too heavy-handed with the color grading, as any director is these days. We're in Mexico, so it's bright orange, like the Soderbergh Villanueva. That's an old school reference for anyone out there. Emmy award winning. Yeah, we've got to highlight that fact. So there is some heavy-handedness to this. Don't get me wrong. And I think a lot of people look. Granted, the stuff that happened here, I don't think either one of us are excusing the fact that it's heinous types of level of violence. Does he overstep the mark going on a brutality to animals here? I would say probably perhaps a little bit. I think that to showcase the brutality of war, I don't think you need to showcase stuff like that and having rattled and then climb up and then kill 6 people. I don't know. I think it's very heavy-handed. But again, that's a very much heavy-handed approach of Ridley Scott. We're going to showcase this. But also, I don't think he's a type of visionary that doesn't leave anything by chance. If something's in here, it's in here for a reason. So I do see the vulgarity of everything, and the fact of that this is meant to be a soldier's best friend, and they're dying here and there, and they're carving them up later to eat them and stuff. So I get the imagery and stuff, but very, very vile, very, very difficult to watch at times. Did not hold back in depiction, but then still felt palatable. I don't want to sound like an absolute nihilist or sadist there, but it was interesting that you compare this to something like The Last Duel, where there's one obviously pivotal scene showcased 3 times there that's harrowing to watch. But ultimately, how that works in towards a film is that it's pivotal to the film. We need to see that from through. We need to see that through 3. God, that was a tongue twister and a half. That we need to see that through the perspectives of that. Very important, we have to see it through 1, which is the victim, in that. Here, it's through the ideology of a man who is brainwashed himself. I mean, the idea that that cannon burst through that horse, didn't touch him at all. He then ran up valiantly up those ladders to kill the English. It's almost like there's someone trying to project to us the idea that perhaps that's not what reality is for a lot of the people, and a lot of people don't seem to be bewildered by the fact either. So to me, I find that a conscious point. I don't know if you would agree. I think that I'm really
Yeah. I mean, also, just you mentioned the color grading. I think it says something about the Napoleon character, and Scott is pretty clear on this. Where like you have this dark and obviously very gruesome battle. You have a very cold and gray France, and then he gets exiled and gets sent to these warmer islands that seem to be, just in general more
yeah.
bright, more palatable. Where if I had to choose where to go, but he can't stand that, and he wants to get back to that horrific battlefield because of what it makes him feel like and what it makes him feel like he is. I think it's all obviously intense. It's obviously
Oh,
there
yeah.
for a choice. It's obviously there as a intention. I don't know. I see it.
I mean, the irony of that this is a man who, towards the end of Waterloo, or beginning of Waterloo, didn't want to go into battle because it was raining, and you're saying like he was more contested with the idea of the weather than sending these boys to the deaths, all in one day. You look at that and you chalk it up, and you can see the bittersweet irony there, but you can also see the vision of a warmonger, of a vile human being that didn't understand the sanctity of life in that regard, of just let these people go to, again, I think it also does it about the Russians burning down Moscow. Why? Because we don't want the French there. I mean, he definitely likes to showcase not the ideology of a person. I think that's very important to him, but also the surrounding factors of the world around it. The last duel, the perspectives, the Rashomon perspectives of it, and that there's also a world out there that's very cruel. Again, this is not the last duel podcast. Go back for that, but cross referencing a woman's livelihood in front of everybody. How like mortifying is that? Making accusations of being impure, and here, that there's a morbid thing surrounding all these people, the world that they're conceived in. Is that negating the fact that Napoleon was consciously doing these things? It doesn't sort of alleviate the idea that he was making these commitments to himself and these wars for anything but himself as well, which I think is a very important aspect. Like, not to get down that road, but it is a film that really does sort of put him to the sword and showcase that this is not a man that one seeks to find solace in, but to push back and see the irony and the condescending, the ego, the naivety. I mean, the amount of times where he slips up and he says something and you just think like, okay, the reactions to stuff. I think a lot of people will oversee this to be comic style type of
Yeah.
inflection, which I think is such like again, like you said before, not to negate other people's opinions. That's not. I don't want to do that, but it will be quite shocked to like, because again, I'll go back to that comment, an unbalanced performance. Napoleon was an unbalanced person. You don't send
Right.
460,000 people to the deaths for your own ego and not be a character who's unbalanced. So I do think, like you said, people are perhaps reading this in the entirety that it's not meant to be delivered. But again, maybe that's at fault of the film. I didn't see it like that, and I know, as what you said, you didn't see it like that either.
Yeah.
The one thing
I think like
oh, go on.
even well, I'll just mention just quickly because it's very relevant to what you're saying. Like
Yeah,
even the
of
Battle of the Pyramids, which like very historically did not take place at the pyramids. Napoleon claimed it did. Napoleon had it commissioned to where it was right next to the pyramids, called it the Battle of the Pyramids. In the film, you get a very quick scene of that, and he literally shoots a pyramid. Like, if you want to go with the unreliable narrator gimmick, or you want to go with the gimmick that this is what he's seeing in his head, or this is the image he's projecting,
Yeah.
that scene fits into it perfectly.
Yes.
I think maybe it's just because, like, which granted, I don't think Ridley Scott, as much as like I love him going and being fun funny. Like maybe when you just go and then you don't give any explanation to why you're doing this, and then you're like, it's just, I don't really care if it's historically accurate,
Yeah.
because they're like, is a very rich conversation you could be having there that you are ultimately undercutting by not saying that. And maybe I'm also just, maybe it's not in there and we're just projecting this,
Yeah,
right? Because we
maybe,
want it to be there. But I don't know, even like if it's not there though, like you could have that reading and
Yeah.
then these choices become incredibly rich ideas and enhance the narratives. Like, I don't know, why don't, like, I just think it's so reductive just to be like, he didn't really shoot the pyramids, bad. Like, I don't know, there's
Yes.
more there. It's choices.
Yeah,
But continue.
yeah, no, I think one aspect of that, just going on that, is where he goes to see the tomb of the mummy. Again, throwback to our Universal monster. I felt we were back there. We were back in the 1930s. It was excellent, but that was that moment that sums this film up for me, in the fact that Napoleon wanted to see an ancestor of that ruled the world, and had to use a box to meet the eye line. And again, there's always that contentious reading of Napoleon was small. I think he was average size of 5'9" or something. That to me is that's a funny British Ridley Scott thing, going like, yeah, he's a short ass. Nobody laughed when that happened, and I was like, oh, I think this is a telling sign here that he's trying to meet essentially what he sees as a pre-existing fabrication, a lineage of his destiny that these people they took up North Africa. Now he is. I will see these people eye to eye, and he had to get on a booster seat to do it. I think that's hilarious on a reading. I don't think this film even sort of wants to give any notion to that, and I also don't think the audience do either, which is a shame. I lost what I was going to say beforehand, but it is interesting about those comedic embellishments. That's one thing I was going to say, is that it's interesting about this film, because I remember a few years ago when Ridley Scott made Exodus: Gods of Kings, and he said that I couldn't put an actor named Muhammad in here because I wouldn't get the finance. I had to put stuff like Christian Bale, Joel Edgerton, etc., etc. And I think with the size of that film, about what that film's about, I can understand to a certain degree how he would in his mind, and ultimately I agree with that judgment of it. I can understand that. I think a few films as of late have maybe pushed back on that sentiment, which is a good thing as well. It was interesting here that really, a bar one actor here, it's very much support sideline. There's a few here that jump up and down. Rupert Everett, which I didn't see that coming at all. That was shocking. Obviously, Vanessa Kirby. There's another one who plays his consul, who was also in Saltburn. We'll move on from that very quickly. But I thought he was very good in both films. He hasn't acted in 10 years. I thought he was incredible in both. I thought he was very good in Saltburn. I thought he was very good here as well. Very stoic, very relaxed. But again, external. Use the eyes. Look at him, look away. Always the face. Always this sort of comedic impact there, that perhaps, having to be a part of the madness, but not being the most sane person there, was interesting. But it is interesting to look at the fact that this film is built on one lead actor, Joaquin Phoenix, and it's $200 million. It can be done, and ultimately he's sort of contradicted himself to a certain degree. Granted, he's playing with a lot of fire in Exodus: Gods and Kings, because there's a lot of conversation there about religion, about God, and stuff like that. So I can understand not wanting to fuck one person off there and then fuck the other person off, because that's where becomes quite frightening. But in the same token, I also think he did the same in Kingdom of Heaven. Orlando Bloom is not really. I mean, Eva Green was not at the top of the top there. And there's a few others. I mean, Edward Norton's behind a mask for the film. Michael Sheen's in it a little bit, but I always thought that this film did really well to level that. I was shocked though that there wasn't anyone. Granted, I don't think you need Russell Crowe here or Christian Bale. Sorry, I don't think it needed that. I think it did very well to push back on that Hollywood trope and keep it very much individual. I think that's another thing that people aren't probably going to go watch it for as well. I think that if you don't like Joaquin Phoenix, or again, if you don't like Joaquin Phoenix, you don't like Napoleon, it's very difficult to sort of go into this blind. So it's very much a film set in its tracks, but it did very well to cope, resting its weight on one character essentially, which is very much supported by Vanessa Kirby, as I said before. And I think again, to read against it, the film will make no real mention of it on its marketing, as Napoleon probably didn't in his real life as well. But yeah, that's probably. If you've got much else to say, but again, I was quite glad that it didn't have someone just jumping in here and jumping
Yeah.
in there.
Also, I'm surprised it's doing so well. I'm not like mad at it, but like when going into this film, as you mentioned, the cast is not necessarily it has Joaquin Phoenix, not a lot of depth for the general audiences beyond that. This film did not have a lot of hype. It didn't debut at a
Yeah,
festival. It didn't necessarily do a big like promotional run from what I saw. It felt very cold going in, but I don't know. I guess it's probably just Ridley Scott's name that's drawing people here, or it's the idea of Joaquin Phoenix playing Napoleon. I think that's like a very prestigious idea when you hear that, but audiences are turning out apparently. So I agree it's kind of a big drop, I assume, especially as the word of mouth isn't quite great. But I mean, I'm happy people are showing up. That's reassuring because I really expected this to just like bomb, especially because
yeah,
like Apple isn't even really promoting this. Like they have Killers of the Flower Moon. That's very much so where their eggs are in the basket. I am curious when this drops on Apple TV Plus. I'm very curious because normally in the past they've just done simultaneous releases for both this and Killers of the Flower Moon. Obviously, you get a big theatrical run. It's not even on like the press screener site. Neither film
yeah.
is.
I thought it was very strange.
So right. So I'm curious what their plans are as far as that goes. Because also I can't see. Because I naturally I expect both to probably be up around Christmas, but also then I don't feel like you would put both up at the same time. So I don't know what they're going to do. But I'm happy people are showing up. Like, I guess boiling it down, I did not
Yeah.
expect this to do so well, but people are here. Granted, I hope Ridley Scott this doesn't like turn them off from other ideas. Granted, Gladiator 2 has some natural selling power. Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you. I think if we did our Gran Turismo bit on this, I don't even know which way we'd go on this. I don't think 50 million opening weekend for a film of this budget, it's not that bad. And also, it's interesting that whoever they sell the rights to, the streaming platform, they're always going to be slightly in the negative. So I always think it's a good idea to put them out in theaters, put them out for as long as they can. I mean, it's not in any detriment to anyone else, but just for an economic boost. I agree with you. I think it's interesting. Out of the two of them, I in England, this is from a perspective of my own government. So what you yourself in America and I'm here. I would disagree with that. I think Napoleon's been pushed quite hard here. I think Killers of the Flower Moon was pushed very poorly. And in the same token, Killers of the Flower Moon, the first 2 weeks it was out, I was working, so I struggled to get 3.5 hours, 4 hours essentially, and I went to go watch it on a really awkward day before the podcast recording, and it just disappeared. And Napoleon's equally as interesting. The fact that the first 2 weeks start from 10 a.m. end at 9 at p.m. throughout the day, and then it will just slowly disperse. So again, very big films, very very big screening times. I appreciate that, but again, my cinema was packed, absolutely packed. So it was really good. Again, it's interesting how they're going to release both of these because I think this won't come out until next year. But and I just want to touch on that again because I think it'll be interesting how they sell this. I think Kills of Flower Moon will be fine. I think they'll release that just to push before the Academy Awards because if Apple get that best actress with Lily Gladstone, like wow, that will check that. And they'll just that's what they're hoping for. Here, maybe costume. But again, I think there's other things here, bigger films that could get that. So this is probably beside the point around that conversation. I know you don't like indulging in Academy Award conversation. It's too early. It's too early. But I will say this: it will be interesting what Apple do with the extended director's cut and the theatrical cut. My theory is that they will release the theatrical cut in the cinemas, and the extended director's cut will be solely on Apple TV Plus. I don't think they'll release the theatrical cut first. I think they'll want to try and sell the 4-hour vision. And if I was Ridley Scott, I'd also ask for that as well. I'd ask like a prenup of sorts of that when it first goes on to demand. I will release your film in theaters for a mandate of under 2.5 hours. That's my promise. But then I want the theatrical cut to be exclusively in cinemas, and we'll go for the director's cut. That's the way I would do it. Otherwise, how would you invest the fact that someone would want to watch 4 hours over 2.5? And then, as it's a streaming service, where's your monetary value there? How are you highlighting the fact of someone wanting to pay more? That's where I would come down on it. I don't know. It'll be a shame. I don't know, because I know that Netflix don't do it, of course, aside from release empty boxes and stuff. But have we got any Apple TV physical release media as of late? Is that a thing?
I don't think it is.
I get so
I don't believe so.
I don't know if the audience will know this. Ridley Scott is on Twitter is like he's your dad's favorite filmmaker. That's a sort of like a controversial statements like, "Oh, like he's a dad's he's a film that you get your dad for Christmas, or you get like a male uh, involvement in your life. That's the film you get them." And I sort of don't necessarily disagree there. But Napoleon will do very well in DVD and Blu-ray sales at Christmas. So not releasing that
Yeah.
again is a massive travesty, because this is a film where people of a generation will want to watch this at home. I know my granddad would want to watch this. I think this is very interesting for a lot of people at an older generation who don't want to go out to the cinema as well. So
Yeah.
it can bypass the streaming service, can bypass the people who can't obviously watch it or afford the streaming service, which is a privilege in its own right at this time. Also, again, to the cinema and then get it on the DVD. So Apple will miss an absolute masterclass of a menage a trois, um, economic resounding success. But again, these streaming services don't seem to really be indicted to have the people in their minds, do they? But no,
Well, the hope is then that your granddad, you get him a Apple TV Plus subscription,
yeah, that's what
right?
they want. Yeah, it's
Um,
not happening. No,
yeah,
it's not happening.
I think
No,
Apple TV. I love when like and Netflix, like it was a while ago, but like I love with like Apple TV Plus or newer streaming services, seeing their like strategies change
yeah,
as like they do things and it just fails, and then they're like, oh, how do we get people? I think we're moving into, and I think I know like some things not publicly known, but I think we're moving into Apple TV Plus, like trying to get big events. So I think like we're going to see a lot less of their random monthly releases probably, as far as films, and we're going to have more of a focus beyond like Killers of the Flower Moon,
yeah,
Napoleon Extended Cut, other projects that maybe they're going to be releasing. So like I think that's the direction the streaming platform is moving towards. I don't think that's going to be overly successful, especially if you're showing them in theaters beforehand. But I think it's best to show them in theaters because I don't think people will show up to Apple TV Plus if they're just on there. It's like I don't know, streaming services, right? You're kind of screwed if you do or if you don't. But
yeah,
I think that's probably what I would expect the next like 2 or 3 years of Apple TV Plus to slowly focus more in. Because as a streaming service, I mean, they've released just endless TV. They've released endless
yes,
movies. They're
yeah.
very active with releases, and very, very few of them catch on to be anything.
Mhm.
Um, so it makes sense to cut down on like if you can make 20 TV shows and you can make 5 movies, or you can make a Napoleon. The idea is hopefully it will draw more. I don't know. We'll see. I'm
Yeah,
excited. I mean, I'll be on Apple TV Plus watching the 4 hour version.
oh no, same.
Um,
Yeah, yeah. I've got it. You get it with you get 6 months free with any Apple devices anyway, so you just stack them up. But which is like a really great idea to get an economic boost on your competitors. The one thing that again, not to get too much into like film historians here, but obviously we both spoke about this off air and on air. It's good to get some perspective on this and look back at the canon of cinema. What a lot of people are sort of misconstruing about the streaming services is that this hasn't been done before, and it has. The streaming services now are just different production houses. They are the MGMs and the Universals and the Paramounts of the times. So back when we go to the 10s and the 20s and the 30s, we're going through the same thing, but we're not seeing it through 10, 20, 30 years. We're seeing it through a decade. So essentially what's happening now is Samuel Goldwyn and the people who own Universal are trying to get their studios off with a successive amount of hits. It's the same thing that's happening with the streaming services. So while Universal had the monster movies, some other people had the Three Stooges, and you could sell them to TV in the mornings when that came out. You could send them to the serials on the radio. This is what's happening now. We're just making TV. So Apple TV now, and very much Netflix. Netflix is the conglomerate. So it's like Netflix are the MGM of its time, and now we've got International Pictures coming, which is Apple TV, and they've signed the likes of like James Cagney and stuff, and they've got him from what would have been Warner Bros at the time. But I digress. Um, we're just seeing the same thing now. International Pictures could not keep up with the likes of MGM. Couldn't do it, or Warner Bros. They couldn't do it because that every single film they make then has to hit a profit. And here now, it's very much of a conversation of what do I watch, not how do I watch it. And that's a very difficult aspect to go through because I mean I have it all the time. And you will agree with this. It's very difficult, even as in the hemisphere of what we do, in that it's sort of we can pick and choose, and but we know what to watch essentially. We know that what's going to hit, what's going to do very well. You can have an idea of watching something before you even watch it. But many other audiences, it's checking Amazon and watching 10 minutes of this piece of shit, 10 minutes of that, and then the algorithm changes it. we're in a different hemisphere now where that's the affordability you can have. Back then, you couldn't. So if you didn't have something that popped and banged, you were in the shit. And Universal, even with the monster movies, multiple times throughout their discourse, were in the shit. I mean, having to release 3 mummy movies a year, that is someone in the shit big time, you know. So what's happening now is just the same thing, but Netflix is the conglomerate because they own other people's uh, they own the populace of other people's rented stuff. If those people stop those transfers, Disney Plus did, and then the which then took the 20th Century Fox titles, Paramount have also done the same thing. They've taken their stuff on there, so it's shocking. I mean, unbeknownst, I don't know if this is public as well, but I'll announce this. This is about 5, 6, 7 years ago. I went to a Universal Studios uh, conversation in private where they were interviewing certain people, and they were talking about investing in their own public streaming service of pure Universal titles. And even they were talking about that even against Netflix, if they pulled everything off, I mean, they'd have to pay a massive amounts of money to take them off because Netflix is it's freehold on them anywhere. And then you've got to then pay to have that service at the time. I don't think it was ready. I don't think Netflix was in the fro just yet. I think it had Orange is the New Black, sorry, and then that was really about it. So if you look at it now, the trajectory has changed. Apple having an individual output is very important to Apple, but like you said, there's a very strange attribute of going for the TV, and it's interesting that I thought, I don't know if you agree here, but I thought Netflix did that also with TV. Let's get them in for 8 hours. Let's get them in for 10 hours. And then we can have everything else. Apple's a strange one because aside from Ted Lasso and that Catherine the Great thing with Ellie Fanning and Nicholas Hoult, I mean, there's not really much there. I mean, Tehran did very well, but no one wants to watch it. And I think that
The morning show is around. I don't think it's like incredibly popular, but it's
yeah,
talked
no,
about.
and I think that sentiment is probably sums up most of that. I never watched Ted Lasso. I'm not interested. I would never buy an Apple TV product. I'd have Apple TV Plus membership to watch that show. Would I watch their films exclusively? Yes, I would do. But it has to then come with a prestigious amount. They will have to spend a small fortune to get these filmmakers over, like Scorsese, appease them by physical media because there's a lot of conglomerate that won't do that, and then also then try and keep the budgets down and keep it economically passable. As a business strategy there, as we've all seen this throughout the history of a film, that isn't going to work. It isn't going to work at all. These films are too high budget with the people that they've got, unfortunately. If they can bring smaller films in, but then who wants to go work with Apple TV who isn't given a budget? So it's like a catch-22. And I'm just shocked that Netflix haven't gone to David Lynch and went, "We're going to give you 100 million. We're going to give you 50. I'm going to say 100, but geez, honestly, that wouldn't not work very well. We're going to give you $50 million, David. Make what you want." And I think that would bring a different type of audience to that platform. No one's willing to do that, but they'll spend 250 million on Red Notice, and I find that really sort of difficulty to confide in. I don't find that compelling. I know you probably agree with me. A lot of audiences it's just interesting how new and old are merging, but at the same time they're pushing each other away. Just to get back to the point then about Apple TV, I also agree that I'm glad that they're going for the Ridley Scotts and they're going for the 4-hour cut. I really like that they're indulging in it. But as a business proposition there, I don't really understand how that then influences how they can make money. I think the onus there is that the big one to get the best picture. I think that's what they're hoping for. I think that they're hoping for an Academy
Which
Award.
they got already. They've
Yeah,
already got it with Coda.
yeah. And I
I
think
think that I mentioned in our Slack chat recently, but I mentioned between Killers of the Flower Moon and Napoleon. I was like, oh, I really think we're at the end of the era of streaming services just giving these like really high class filmmakers just a big budget. I
yeah,
mean, look at like Netflix and The Irishman. Ultimately, what did they get from The Irishman past like the prestige of like having The Irishman, right? Which is a really great feature. It didn't really necessarily bring in a ton of money. It costed a shit ton of money. They didn't get the Academy Award success they were going for with it. I mean, it's just like we're at this point where even like as they are getting Academy Award success with certain films, I just think the logic of like what they're going to gain from spending all this money for these high class filmmakers are going to eventually just like not be worth it, especially when you have something like Red
Yeah.
Notice, or you have, as much as we don't want to have it, be a thing, you have like Heart of Stone. You have these films that are really bad and they make a shit ton of money. So
Yeah.
obviously, as a business, though, you're going to prioritize those films. You're going to prioritize the Purple Hearts. You're going to prioritize just whatever shit draws people in. I think it's really sad that like I don't know where Ridley Scott. Well, I don't know where Martin Scorsese is going to go for his next $200 million feature or whatever.
Yeah, also just to add on to that as well, and I completely agree with you. I think the issue with the Netflix specifically, but also most of the streaming platforms, is that they've brought in people who have governed the idea of knowing that Martin Scorsese as a name is quite beholden to use within your portfolio. We produce Martin Scorsese's blah blah blah. And then they're also dealing with people who work on an algorithm. It's that, well, they're not clicking on this. Why do we want that? I think there's a really differing ideology between new Hollywood and old Hollywood, in the fact that I think we're still detailing the fact of it's a Martin Scorsese film. And I think it's that sentence there that's the interesting. Is that still good enough to get bums in seats? And Netflix will provide you details to say that, well, yeah, it was worth The Irishman. But as on an economic value, I wouldn't have thought it would be. The only thing they've got there is gatekeeping the fact that they've got the last ensemble of Scorsese's career. They have The Irishman. They'll have The Irishman forever. You can't watch it anywhere else but at ours. And I think these people hoping to get these directors in at a certain age, Ridley Scott, but again Martin Scorsese, is that this is terrible to say, but once the fact that Martin Scorsese stops making films, these companies, these conglomerates own those films, and you have to rent and buy them and watch it on their platform. Right, you can't own that, and I think that's an aspect now we're growing into. I think that's the really morbid outlook of these streaming services, and the fact that it's not that you can go out and, or it's not that, oh my god, that Netflix made The Irishman. Have you seen that? It's that, where can I watch The Irishman? Oh, it's on Netflix. That's the idea that we're going towards now. I think it's fucking bitter, the fact that these people are going to, conglomerates are going to use these films and keep them and build them as very small portfolios, and the fact that, well, we actually own that Scorsese film. And can you imagine that Scorsese's last film would be The Irishman? In a weird sense, is that if you wanted to watch the last Scorsese, you had to buy a Netflix subscription. I mean, that's like saddening in its own right. But yeah, no, I agree. I think it's probably the beginning of the end, and I also don't think they'll. I mean, I can understand it when you get to a point where, towards the end of your career. I mean, they both hit their 80s. I think Ridley Scott's actually older than him, and he's like, I make a film a year, don't bother me. I mean, that's just like you can tell he's from Newcastle, like he's working class, like full through and through. Never gets them, because he started when he was 40, so he had 10 years at least of catching up. So I appreciate that idea, but they'll want to make all the films that they haven't been able to when they were younger, and the idea that they can get those budgets now. But I do miss the idea that Scorsese making a film like Mean Streets, make a film like Taxi Driver. You don't have to spend all that money on it. Like, to make it for 50 million, you can make them contemporary, and you can have an ideology of it. I don't think that Scorsese has to make a film of like 250 million, like The Irishman, at that level with the de-aging. There has to be a way around it now. And I agree with you. Which one do you see first then happening? The idea that these directors will stop getting the money, or they'll stop working? Because
I think it'll stop working.
Yeah,
I don't think they have the push that like Peace and Love, and this is not all to attack them or like I know their theology, but like I think if they can't make the big projects they want to, I don't know why. I mean, Scott may be different, but like I don't know why Scorsese would be compelled when he has a filmography of that size. I
yeah,
think he would just be happy to go into retirement, enjoy his years with his daughter, right? Like, and very valid. There's no issue with that. Yeah, I even past that, like with what you're saying about making smaller budgets, and maybe I'm less concerned about these bigger names who've really established themselves. But like, I think limits in budget, limits even in like some studio interactions, can be really productive and good for a
yeah.
filmmaker and building a filmmaker. I'm so terrified for you to watch Beau is Afraid. Just know, and I'll accept if you like it. This also said, I never told you to go watch this film. But like, Ari Aster is someone who, when he was restricted by budget, was making these really, in my opinion, great features. Then he was just given the chance to do whatever he wants. And then he made, in my opinion, a really bad movie. And I think we're seeing that a lot of these times where these people, when they're restricted, there's a certain level of thought, there's a certain level
Yeah.
of push, a certain level of effort that comes through. And I'm sure you'll agree with that, where like, it produces something special at times to where that's not always the bad thing. Some people just need those restrictions. And I think when you just remove that and you say, okay, we're going to give you as big of a budget as you need, I think it can hurt the creative process and it can hurt the output even at times, which sounds like weird and sounds like counterintuitive, but like, I think it's true. And I like, so again, I'm not so much worried about like Scorsese and Scott, but like, I think the mindset going forward shouldn't be necessarily we just need to remove all restrictions and all like conflict within that process.
Yeah, I agree completely. I also think that it's imperative to note that human nature is that with limitations comes creativity, and that's been since the dawn of of mankind. It's the fact of that, thinking outside the box is what credible. You look at most impetus in film history; those are ideas that have been brought through limitation. Through limitation of access comes creativity and wanting to make film, doesn't it? It's mean that it's the onus of being a creative type. I just don't think these two like these people will sacrifice their vision. That's the only thing. I just don't think they'll. I mean, if I was maybe I'm speaking about out of touch in I just think that they're very two proud filmmakers who've been in it for 40, 50, 60 years. Specifically, Scorsese. Scorsese dedicated his life to film. I don't find that Scorsese will ever get his foot off the gas. He'll go there. He'll slip away in the director's chair, and what more fitting of a legendary iconography to do so. Um, the one thing I'm slightly worried about with the Netflix thing, though, again going forward with these type of films, is that it's interesting that there's a video going around on Twitter about David Fincher's The Killer. I'm not going to get into the review of that film at all. We've done that. You can read it on Letterboxd. So we'll not have to move on very quickly, but it's interesting that people are like, "Oh, have you seen how much CGI was in this film?" And I watched it and I was like, if I was a producer of that film, I'd be an absolutely, you might have to bleep this, but I'd be fucking incensed. I'd look at the dailies and be thinking, why are you using CGI to that level? Why don't you just practically shoot that? Why are you orchestrating to move the littlest details within your films? And you look at through his filmography, specifically post Girl with Dragon Tattoo, and he's encompassed that to a degree where it's actually quite uncomfortable for me as a viewer, and the fact that it's not that I find it difficult to watch these using CGI, but where was the creativity of a guy who did Seven? I can understand having to utilize 2007 CGI rooftops of San Francisco and have it into the 1960s and 70s. I'm all for that, but there doesn't need to be a level of CGI enhancement with The Killer. And I mean, 200. I mean, I don't know how much it would, but it'd be 180 million, 200 for that film. How can you condone that as a Netflix executive? And I also think as well is that there's nobody in these studios like at the other ones who are like, no, you can't make that. You want to make a film about Gallipoli, Ridley? Like, no, no, you can't get $250 million for that film. It's like Scorsese Gangs of New York in the 70s. No, it can't be done at this time. Either find a way around it or wait. And these filmmakers waited and did their own thing. But there's nobody at studio level now, aside from an absolute monster who thankfully was put away to prison a few years ago, who seemed to had a monopoly on things, who told certain creatives no, mostly negative than positive. Don't get me wrong, I'm not condoning anything about Harvey Weinstein, but there isn't anyone at that level anymore where it's like, for good and for bad, of course, that's saying, why are you using this much CGI? I don't feel comfortable that we're spending 70, 80 million on VFX. Granted, we're hiring people, but then they treat them like shit to begin with. That you're making $80 million worth of CGI when we could do this far less accessible and a far less practical way. I mean, these same people making those errors for me, it just sums it up. So I don't have any sleepless nights thinking about what Netflix executive will do next. But that being said, I think Apple will face these decisions sooner or later. I can imagine that those receipts coming for Napoleon and just looking and going, ooh, this is going to be a tough one. This because sometimes you've got to balance your books. But again, like I said before to you, I think we both. I do fair with that bet. I wouldn't know what I would have done, and I think 50 million for a film of this caliber is quite good. If it sees 100, yeah. I mean that's not Oppenheimer levels, but that's still pretty good. I'd be feel quite happy with that. But this is a question I'll put to you then. And granted, we've only just seen the opening week. However,
sure.
Do you think that this was worth the risk. That's one A, worth the risk for Apple, and B, to answer that, yes or no, do you think then that's worth the risk to then roll the dice on perhaps another venture from both these filmmakers?
Do I think it was worth it from Apple? I mean, no. Just like financially, right? Like,
Yeah,
no, it wasn't financially worth it.
no,
I mean, I appreciate, maybe it's harder because I don't like Killers of the Flower Moon, but like, I appreciate that now they can say they had these films, they contributed to like cinema, right? Like, I appreciate that, but like from a numbers perspective, and thinking of also if you took these budgets, if you had like, did the A24 strategy of finding these up and coming filmmakers, having smaller budgets, think about how many projects could be made within this, with this budget, with these resources. No, it probably isn't worth it. Even though I appreciate that we got Napoleon,
yeah,
Apple, hey, thank
yeah.
you.
You know, I agree with you. I agree.
No issues here. Do I think it was worth it? Do I think they're going to do it again? I think it depends. It's hard to know now because I don't know how they will do on streaming. I don't know what that conversation will be like. If they go to streaming and they just die, no one talks about Killers of the Flower Moon, no one talks about Napoleon, no one watches the 4-hour cut. I feel like they might be willing to. I don't know. I don't know if they would do it again. I think they would want to be more like Scorsese, give us something more traditional like The Irishman that has your cast of characters that people love to try to get a bigger impact. With Ridley, I don't know. You also look at the mixed reception just in general. Napoleon got the mixed reception House of Gucci got, the mixed reception The Last Duel got.
Yeah,
It's not like he's a filmmaker who's like, as much as I love him, as much as I love these
no, I
works,
agree.
the general public are not necessarily clamoring for it. So I think it's harder for Ridley to get another chance than it is Scorsese. But I mean, as far as is it worth it? My business brain says no, but like, of course, as a consumer, as someone who loves film, I'm happy we got them.
Yeah, I'll just add to that because I think Ridley Scott is playing a blinder here. Because when you, granted, these are elderly gentlemen in their own right, and I think time is fleeting to spend with family, to be a creative. I think it's a very difficult choice. Well, essentially, what they want to do next is not just a run of the mill. We can do this and come back to it. There has to be decisions now. I think Scorsese thinks very firmly on that. I don't think Ridley gives a fuck. I think Ridley Scott, and I wouldn't ever want him to think that I was speaking out of Julia, but I think he's so rock and roll in the fact that fuck him. I made my film. Whatever they want to do with that's up to them. They paid for what I wanted to do. Fuck them. And I think that's the attitude. I think they're very different. I think Scorsese will take it a little bit more deeper, and I think he will think on a resonant level of what I choose next will live long in the memory of when I'm not here. I think Ridley doesn't think like that. So I'd push back on that a little bit. Just the fact that from my own perspective, I think Scorsese will have to think real hard what he does next. I know there's another film about a mutiny with some American legionnaires that he's trying to do with DiCaprio, and then obviously that H.H. Holmes thing died of death. It's getting done by Keanu Reeves. I think he's left that now. I think that would have been a very interesting attribute to do. I think he'll have to
I
really
think,
choose
yeah.
something where the budget will have to be right. It's a story he'll want to do, and those things will get fleeting. Ridley, I think, has played an absolute blinder here to make this, knowing it will lose money. Absolutely, like the things he's come out in the press and just thought, nah, not to you, not to fuck the French. They hate themselves. Were you there? Like that, he's just come out and been discussing film. I've earned the rent for the year here, haven't they? What they've been quoting him all the time. I mean, he's giving loads of publications food for thought, but I mean, he booked Gladiator 2 after this. There's only one way it's going to
Yeah.
go for Ridley in the fact that he will get a commercial hit next time around, and it's genius.
Yeah.
And it's also not just a commercial hit. It's like he knows exactly what's going to work there. He's already shot half of it. He already, he shot an hour of foot. He shot half of it. Well, he was shut down production, wasn't it, with the COVID stuff that happened.
Because of the strike.
Yes, because of the strike.
I
Sorry, yes,
believe.
I would get mixed up with The Last Duel. He's already shot an hour of footage, so in the can, it's done.
He's edited it.
Yeah, it's done.
And he has 90 minutes edited, and then he has 90 minutes to go, he said.
I fucking love that.
It's genius to have Gladiator 2
He
next.
knows what
And
he's
like,
doing.
why
He
wouldn't
knows.
he? Yeah, no, he knows the game he's playing. He's very smart. I mean, you don't get this far and become Ridley Scott without being smart about what you're doing. I think there's also just like, though, a practical difference between Scorsese and Scott, where like Scorsese wants to take his time. It kind of reminds me of Hayao Miyazaki in the sense of like every film he's prepared to be his
Yes.
last, and he wants it to be able to hold that weight. But practically, every film really does hold the chance to be his last, just like being
Yeah.
honest. Ridley Scott's making 2 films a year. Like literally after Gladiator 2, he already has lined up his next film. So like
I
I
love
think
it.
practically, number one, he doesn't really care in general. I think he's just having fun at this point. But like practically, he knows he probably has a decent amount of features left at the rate he's going. Granted, anything can happen at any point, but like I do agree there's a very clear difference in mindset. But like also I guarantee Ridley Scott does not do the press tour he does for Napoleon if he doesn't have Gladiator 2 next. Like
Undoubtedly.
and it, like
Undoubtedly,
he's just yeah. I mean, I think the Ridley Scott train is much more fun than the Martin Scorsese train,
Agreed.
just in general. I mean, I'm a Scott fan. Also helps that I enjoy his work. So I'm like, yeah, give me 2 a year.
Yeah.
But I think it's very interesting, a tale of 2 filmmakers who have 2 very different methodologies and ideologies around what they are doing as far as their filmography.
Yeah, I mean Gladiator 2 as well. The fact he can wrestle with that and walk behind it. I mean, he'll have got the box office receipts of this and thought, walked onto the set of Malta with his hat on, which I know he would do. He'll have one of his. He won't have a cowboy hat, but he'll have like a serenaded hat on. He'll wear linen white shirt, linen pants, and black shoes, hiking shoes, and he'll be there with the cigar. And he'll be like, "Let's go." And that's the attitude I think that these filmmakers have got. Granted, he's been very, very lucky in his life that he's got some big hits through the canon, but so Scorsese. But Ridley Scott's got big canon hits, big, big canon hits. So I think he can have that authority of walking on that set and having the balls as big as brass. Whereas I think other directors, will again, like they say, 24 crowd. I think Ari Aster would have found that. Again, I haven't seen it, but from your Testament and many others, that Beau is afraid is a feature that would have hurt him. And I think I'm just hoping that maybe there is going to be that conversation one day about giving these directors all this fact of money and all this success when it hits hard on your third film. I mean, it's a very rare occasion to go 3 films and get them all in order. I think there's very few directors I could even think of, especially with a debut sophomore. And sophomores are renowned for being petty, Tarantino. But there's many issues there. But yeah, I think that this film doesn't. Right, granted, we're both Ridley Scott fans, so this is going to come from a place of absolute, uncanny valley in the sense of like there's love and affection here. But this does not throw me off wanting to watch another Ridley Scott film. With Killers of the Flower Moon, there's the idea that like I don't think it's because he had to make that film. We can argue if he was the right man to make that film, but here, I don't. This is actually really good fun for me, like you said, and I think as a consumer, I'm all here for it. And if we get another 2 more of big films like this, I'll be there for it. I just think that the audiences are going to wane now. I think they have an older intended target audience, and I think there may have been like maybe a 22-year-old, 25-year-old in the audience for me, but there wasn't anyone at that level where 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds are wanting to watch Napoleon, which is kind of like I get that. I mean, you're gonna have more people watching Hunger Games than you're gonna have watched this, but for that next generation of filmmakers, it's gone, isn't it? I don't think it's there anymore. I don't think Ridley Scott can get those audiences in. No, Scorsese, and if you're gonna earn your crowd, they don't spend money in a movie theater either. So that would be my closing conversation on that. It's just that the audience is gone now, which is a shame. But
And it doesn't help that they have their filmography. I mean, like Scorsese, I think like younger audiences understand who Scorsese is and they like him, but they like him for like Taxi Driver, right? They like him for his older works.
yes,
They don't necessarily have a push though because of that to go see Killers of the Flower Moon, right? Like the connection is not there. Though I think also it's just like changing times. I think no one is probably going to get high school crowd to be like, yo, let's go watch the 3-hour Napoleon film, right? I think that is just like a change in time, sadly.
yeah,
But at least their earlier filmographies, I mean, at least Scorsese, I think like there is something that speaks to certain demographics of like younger audiences, specifically male, specifically, certain things. But at least I guess there's that. But I agree. I don't think their legacies, especially the later filmographies, are going to be, defined by younger audiences or even general audiences. I don't think I could go to a random person and be like, hey, did you like The Irishman? Or did you see Killers of the Flower Moon? I think they'd probably go like, what's that? I don't think they're relevant really, to be honest.
Is this to a younger audience or later on?
I think to any, well, I mean, specific, I guess, like, let's say, cut off like 30-year-olds. I don't think I'd go to a random 30-year-old and be like, "Did you watch The Irishman?" I think they would be like, "I don't know what that is."
Yeah, I
Just
agree.
I'm talking about like very general, not at
No,
all
no,
a good
I
film.
don't think you're wrong there at
Yeah,
all. I tell you what's going to happen next as well, and I think one filmmaker who's going to have to brace for it, and I think they've already prepared for it. But very much in this very Scorsese attempt of making very vibrant, violent, methodical features that run about human spirit, like is Paul Thomas Anderson. I think Paul Thomas Anderson is at that point now where he's making his Kunduns and he's making his Age of Innocences, and nobody's wanting to watch them because they want the Boogie Nights director, they want the Magnolia, they want the Master, and they want There Will Be Blood. I think Paul Thomas Anderson has a really strange trajectory going forward in the fact that he's gonna be hitting the issues that Scorsese is hitting now, and he's not even 50, and Scorsese's, well, he probably is in his 50s, but Scorsese's in his 80s. That'd be quite damning for someone like Paul Thomas Anderson. But at 82, 83, because his birthday was last week, I'd take that in my stride. One thing's like I'm watching a lot of old films for the Noir November, and I'm watching a lot of Orson Welles, and nobody gave a shit about Orson Welles making films like Citizen Kane, Lady from Shanghai, and The Stranger. And you look back on those films and you think like, this was a guy who's egotistical beyond belief, was the Marlon Brando of his time in the sense that he took over everything he could do and made it his way. But there was such a gleam in what he made in this cinema. I mean, how he shoots certain things in Citizen Kane is like, I mean, transcending. But then you watch like Lady Shanghai, even his smaller films. The last act of there is like he's making stuff that people are trying to replicate now. And I think Scorsese again has been this and done that, and I think when the time comes, I think he's just making films that not people are many ready for. I think we'll go back and we'll look at The Irishman in 10, 15 years' time, and they consider it a classic, even not if it's not now. But they had to do that with Casino. They had to do with that way, The Age of Innocence. That people will look back on The Departed and go, "It's one of the best remakes ever." Like everyone told him it was sold out. I mean, he won the Academy Award for that film, and everyone thought it was a joke. And I think Ridley Scott's similar in the sense that um, they're just making classics in a sense of that people won't get it now, but they'll get it later down the road. He said that about Blade Runner. He says like more young kids come to me and watch Blade Runner, but they're canon events. I think other filmmakers are not so lucky, and this is a massive set precedent for a lot of those type of that creates. Paul Thomas Anderson is one. Ari Aster, if he's not careful. I mean, what did he think 3.5, 3 hours of Beau is Afraid? What did he think was going to happen? I think there's a lot of moral ambiguity and ego there as well, and a sense of
for sure.
yeah. I mean, there's a lot of
I think they get in this echo chamber though, because
yeah,
like I think A24. I mean, film Twitter, right, is an echo chamber, and I think like not that studios are like unaware of like the reality of the world, but I think when you go on to an echo chamber like that, and everyone's saying you're the genius, you're the next,
yeah,
legendary filmmaker. Oh, you're making 5 star, 5 star. I mean, kind of almost tying back into Napoleon. You begin to believe that ego, and you
yeah,
begin to think I can push and push and push and gonna
yeah.
find that, and then one day you find your Waterloo, and then you're like, well,
Yeah, no, I
you're
mean
not.
the irony of that as well. And I just hope that doesn't get spoken in Ridley Scott's career himself. The irony of, I mean, where I'll answer. I would answer this for you. I'll ask you a question, but I'll answer it as well. It's like, where do you think Ridley Scott is? It where he thinks he is in the aims of Napoleon? I think you could probably argue that Scott is on the precipice of going to his Waterloo. He didn't think that. Ridley Scott is getting exiled and coming back, and he's coming back to France, and he's been doing that for the last 25 years. So I think Ridley Scott's far from it. But again, it's like Napoleon. It is interesting that you look at a director and you look at Napoleon, especially Ridley Scott, and it's interesting that you see those parallels. But it's funny that again going back to that interview where he says that, because in the interview with his kids as well, that Luke and the other one I can't remember his name, but Luke's is directing his own right. He's done a lot of documentaries. He's one about Oasis not so long ago, but he also directs a lot of second unit for Ridley, and they were talking about that. What's the thing that Ridley Scott sees in a lot of his characters? It's like it's his mom, and it's their grandma, this working class woman who was 5'3", swore like a trooper, had a temper, and she was like the army sergeant, and again I mentioned this in the beginning, but that there's this conversation where they say in every one of his films, she's in there, and this one is not a background character; it is Napoleon. And I sort of love that. When I read the interview, I thought it was lovely that he mentioned that, because it comes from like a really. I can imagine a lot of people, maybe from a different culture, would read that and be like, "Oh, that's terrible." But looking at it as on a British side of it, I can see that. I can see that the again the gender dynamics in this country going to generation is the father goes to work away in where in Newcastle is in the mines of the pits, and the wife's cooking, cleaning, taking care of this household with the children, all the while having to balance everything. And I bet she was an absolute monster in a wonderful way. I bet she ran that house like better than the drill sergeant did. And I love that at 84 years old or 82, however old he is, to still be injecting part of his family into it. And again, he talks about his brother Tony. Anyone from Uncle Jem's podcast and also for Clapper, Tony Scott's little darling for us. We've always loved Tony Scott. So he talked about his brother and stuff like that. And it's interesting that he's a director who's come from. Granted, he's lived a very privileged life. Let's not misconstrue that. But it's interesting that 82, he's just still rock and roll, even with all the setbacks. He just doesn't give a shit. I've always, I don't know if you agree with this. I find it very difficult to sometimes. I get conflicted when someone has ego and someone has skill, and it's difficult because it's the idea that you get quite antagonistic over it because you can't diffuse the two. But I think Ridley and Napoleon are interesting, like you said before. That do we look at Napoleon? Is that genius or is that just stubbornness? I think partly it's but hand in hand, and I think Ridley Scott's very much like that in a sense of, I mean, Blade Runner killed him, like he absolutely annihilated him. Like he got kicked out of the post production. Not many people don't come back from that. Then to go through like the 80s and not really have a big of a bank, and then go through the 90s, get his big one with Thelma and Louise, and then just on and up and up and up. The likes of Alien, Prometheus, etc. And I think you can look at that, and I do love that characteristic of Ridley Scott. Again, going back to Napoleon, sorry, but there is something about wanting to see him succeed, and reading those interviews, and not. I don't ever see him as an arsehole. Granted, I'll put my hands up in here, and it's recorded here. We can watch it again. If it was anyone else, I'd have blocked them. I'd have like, I'm not watching that film. What an absolute arsewipe! Like, but for some reason, because it's Ridley Scott, I do find it quite engaging. I don't know why. I don't know where you feel on it, but it's just something that I just find it so engaging with the fact that he's just a director. He's rock and roll, doesn't care, makes what he wants somehow, and still makes bangers. He's just a walking contradiction throughout his whole life. He shouldn't be where he is. He was born in Newcastle and South Shields. Granted, Scorsese was born in Little Italy as well, the Bronx. It's just amazing to see these directors where they are, and he's making Napoleon at 83 years old, and he's made Gladiator 2. That's crazy. I mean, House of Gucci and The Last Dance in the same year is fucking crazy for an 80-year-old. That's madness. And I'm not disparaging age or anything like that. Age is only how old you feel, but that is crazy. I genuinely
it is.
He genuinely amazing.
All the money in the world to reshoot how much of that film in a month? I mean, like literally, he sent it. Like he literally had 1 month from when they announced they were reshooting it to when I walked into my screening of it. Like that's fucking insane when you see how much of that film that is. Like as you mentioned previously, I don't know if it was on air or not, but you were listing filmmakers and you're like, well, Ridley Scott can because he's just built different. He really is though. Yeah. I mean, like I know as he sails his boat back to Hollywood, he kisses the ground in front of Apple Studios. Like I know at least we'll be there to guide him as his soldiers. Like, no, I fully agree. And I think it's like two very distinct things. Number one, we can see the hardship, we can see the journey. We know that he's worked for this. He was like, yes, privileged, let's be clear, but like he wasn't just handed this on a silver platter and said, make whatever you want. Like he worked for this. And then also I think it was when you have this ego, when you have this ability to make Napoleon, the interjecting things like his mom into it, interjecting very worthy emotional beats. It's not like he's just taking this for granted. It's not like he's just doing the dance of making a film. He's making a film. He's putting his heart and soul and effort and sweat and tears and blood into this. I think that's a very compelling narrative as far as like what you look for in a filmmaker. So I mean, I'm there. I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Like, fully. I think Ridley Scott, like, Ridley Scott is definitely like one of my favorite filmmakers of all time.
I don't know if you
easily
on the press start for All the Money in the World, when the news broke that he was going to reshoot it, he did an interview not so long afterwards, maybe a year later, where was making House of Gucci, and they asked him like, what was the idea? He goes, I wanted to do it, and they're like, yeah, no, but he goes, no, what I did was we went to the studio, and they said we can't really release it. He goes, I'm gonna reshoot it, and he goes, this guy, I don't know the name of it would have been somewhere at Universal, I think, or probably at Fox at the time, because I think it bombed because Fox didn't want sold it to Disney. Disney didn't know what to do with it. But I think one of the Fox executives went, "You can't do that, Ridley." He goes, well, fuck it, I am, and he did it. I think you can get there's a certain with age there becomes a certain of again the ego or stubbornness. It's a very fine line, and I think it engulfs most of his films. But that sentiment is like no one could get away with doing that. It's like, no, fuck you, I'm going to go do it, and he did it, and he released again like the day before, and there's a few bits and pieces there, but it's almost seamless. And also as well, it did him a whole host of good there, because when the interview came out of why he did it, because it was only very much when it broke, he was like, I didn't want him on my film set anymore after what he'd done. And from someone at that age, of that caliber of director within that hemisphere, and also from a certain time, a generational time, I think it was quite warming the fact that he came out and said that, because I think a lot of people would have been like, there's certain other people of that generation have come out and said, I don't need a sex coordinator. When back in my day, so granted, he might come out tomorrow and say some heinous stuff, but I also think that did him a lot of favors. But he's also, throughout his filmography, you probably agree here, there's also really strong feminist undertones from a director there who he's never really wanted to acknowledge that, which I find so strange, because he's said that his mom was such a powerful influence on him and Tony and Frankie's other brother, both tragically, have passed on. But it's fascinating that he's never sort of taken not accountability of that, but taken the opportunity to be like, yeah, well, it's just normal for me. He's very much denied the fact that he doesn't want his films to be associated with that, in a sense, which I think is very strange. Maybe not wanting to dive on that and then make another film where it perhaps gives a different impression. But Thelma and Louise, Ripley, I mean, these are not just strong written characters, but they're primarily female led focused in generations where it's not really the thing. You know, he did it 20 years almost before James Cameron did it with Sarah Connor, but also he did it in 1986 with Ridley again, with Ripley. But you know, he's a filmmaker very much far beyond. I think he did a very strong service, as good as you could do in The Last Duel, because that's a tricky one to do. I think because we was on podcast spoken about, and I think there were certain people even in the call who were quite disapproving of it. And I think having that thing in a film is difficult. But again, a feminist filmmaker that to land on it and say it's the truth. I don't think he has to do it. I don't think he's pandering either. And here, I think he shows Vanessa Kirby's character very much pointedly not as a damsel in distress. She's not something. She's someone, and she has the repercussions of his actions. He hasn't got any sense of sensuality in his little finger, and it's orchestrated for laughs, but also it's what drives her to go find a companionship in something else, and it's all stitched together in that you could definitely much look at that on a single viewing and go, well, actually, like what a horrible woman, like she's just cheated on him for no reason. No, there's drips here. There's teardrops of stuff that pushes her onto other things, And I think it's that little tiny touches he has, little bits of snippets here, which I think again just gives it a little bit more precedent. So I think he's a filmmaker that's sorely missed. I think he's someone who doesn't give a shit to the system. However, he has been afforded to do so. I don't think there's many people who could do that, but yeah, again, not to be on the Ridley Scott show, but we're here for Napoleon, aren't we, I suppose. But yeah, I'll be here for Gladiator 2. I mean, I'll be here for anything. It's just, again, it's like we're going to get to a point where it's like Kane Bounty Mutiny with Freakin'. It's just going to be the last film. You're not going to know. But to Napoleon 2023, crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear. There's a very real world, like most podcasts probably would have skipped Napoleon, but I was like, no, we got to do Ridley Scott. So like, I'll be here obviously for Gladiator. If I'm here for Napoleon, I'm going to be here for Gladiator too.
Yes,
I'm going to be here for pretty much everything else he makes, and I'm sure you can join the podcast to enjoy it with me. Wrapping up, back to Napoleon. Any last thoughts on what you think of Napoleon? I guess I can just start quickly for you to have a moment to collect your thoughts. After this conversation, I think I like the film even more than I did on a first viewing. I think there's incredibly rich. I don't want to give it 5 stars just because I don't want to like continue this trend on ClapperCast. I think there are issues. I'm not going to give it 5 stars, but like undeniably a very rich text. I cannot wait for the 4-hour version. It saddens me. It really saddens me that like this is another one where I just feel like people didn't get it. I did this with House of Gucci. I did this with Last Duel, where I'm just like, I look at these films and I'm like, oh, they're fantastic. And everyone else is like, oh, they're fine. But I love Napoleon. I don't know. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, everyone. But I think it's a really great film. Probably, if you boil it down, probably one of the best of the year, I would say. But Jack, what are your thoughts?
I've spoken way too much on this. I'll keep this brief because I know it upsets a lot of people, but yeah, I feel like I'm sort of on the same token when I came into it. I think this is a really good Ridley Scott feature. I don't think it's at the best of his ability. I think there's a lot of being sacrificed here in order to gain an audience, which is sort of been even more detrimental to the overall product. But I think this is his kingdom of heaven. I think we're going over pre-existing interludes of issues of director's cut, roadshow version, and I think this version will be the theatrical cut, and I think it's a strong 4-star film, no doubt. I think there's a lot here to like, a lot to read into as well. I love in Ridley Scott films to sort of read into the nether regions and sort of have no idea what really is being said and what isn't being said. But I think definitively we'll probably have to come back and do the 4-hour version. I mean, the fact there's an hour and a half on that cutting room floor probably tells you a story in its own right of being another film. So I'm looking forward to that. But the fact that this is a low 4-star, but a 4-star nevertheless for me, it just gives me chills of what we're going to see in that 4-hour version. Shame we can't see that in the cinema. If not, they do a small release. I'm not too sure. But yeah, I'd say positive. I think it'd be interesting to watch this again with a more intimate showing on Apple TV if it gets the theatrical version. But I think more so in the stages to come. I think I'll probably just lap up that 4-hour director's cut, which is insane. We're getting that because I want to see that Exodus Gods of Kings 4-hour cut as well, because there'll be something there. But as a Ridley Scott apologist, I know you probably both repeat yourselves here. Pretty good Ridley Scott stuff. Nothing that I expected to be any different, but still a really rewarding experience nevertheless. Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. Definitely like a solid 4-star film.
Yeah.
With that, let's go to our question. Well, you can watch Napoleon in theaters. It will be on Apple TV Plus eventually down the line. I'm not sure when, but keep an eye out for that and the 4-hour cut. We might need to do a Patreon short little episode on it. But going to our question of the week, we're asking, what's your favorite Joaquin Phoenix performance? Obviously, going off Napoleon, he's had a long career, a lot of very interesting stuff. Jack, what is going to be your answer for your favorite performance from him?
Can you imagine? Joker on it. This is
That'd be haunting. I think you would have to leave the call, to be honest.
Yeah, I think we'd disperse and probably never talk to each other again. I have like, oh god, this is tough. I have like 3, but one really honourable mention. I can't. This is horrible. I think my favourite performance of his, genuinely, is probably the best it's ever been. I think he's outstanding, the master. I just think he's untouchable. I've always liked him in Gladiator, and I think he's very good in You Were Never Really Here. He's exceptional. But when I look at his filmography, I've got it open now. Like, you've got I Walk the Line, 8mm, Uncut Gems that I've just rioted there, but we'll move on. But I think The Master is just, I mean, isn't there advice? There's a really good filmography, but I think in The Master, there's just everything there at the right time. Vulnerability, toxic masculinity. But again, I think that's elevated by the direction of Paul Thomas Anderson, sorry. But the one I'm going to give a warming to, and we both have affection for this, and I hope you haven't forgotten about this, but I think he's exceptional in The Village. Like, really, there's wonderful naivety in him in that film where I watch that and I want to give him a hug. I think he's wonderful. I think how he romances Bryce Dallas Howard, and they just don't know what to do. They're awkward, but it's like watching 2 teenagers purposely slow because of how they've been exercised with that village itself. But he is exceptional there. Again, elevated by a supporting actress in Bryce Dallas Howard, and again, it's the same here, Vanessa Kirby. But he's so good in that film. Oh God! Remember we did that podcast on Get Gems, that you were there to stick up for me as well. Oh, I love that on the gravel road when she's got her hand out and he comes to pick her up.
That's literally my favorite scene in cinema. I think, and that's like such a wild question. Like, what's your favorite scene in cinema? I literally think there's not a single scene in cinema that, as much as that hand grab, that like touches me. I was gonna pick The Village as my answer, so thank you
Yeah,
for spoiling that
I
for
think
me.
I think
I'll
we
go
both
with my other. Go.
honestly.
What were you saying?
I was just gonna say, like you, like not to get emotional, but I generally do think of like where it's just roaring up, and then there's the Thomas James Newton Howard score turns in, and we get in. It just goes all the screen and that. There is one thing I did want to mention, right, and it's not the he didn't do it, and granted the end product's amazing, but I don't know if you know this. I think you probably will do. Is that before James McAvoy was tapped to do Split and Glass, did offer that to Joaquin Phoenix, and seeing how good
Sure.
James McAvoy is in there, and I think he's outstanding. I just think him in Split, I think that really would cement him as probably being one of the best actors today. Knowing full well, or
Sure.
maybe of a generation, but knowing that James McAvoy has done an exquisite job and not really got the credit is deserved there, I think that would have redefined Joaquin Phoenix. I think we would be
Yeah.
talking now about a Brando of his time, which is a shame. But again, yeah, I didn't want to. You have to get some Night Shyamalan. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to mention
Sure.
that. We're apologies,
No. No.
allegedly.
I was between The Village and Signs as my two
Really?
answers. I'm gonna go Signs just because you already mentioned The Village. I think he's incredible in Signs, but like The Village, I don't know, dude. Every single time, and I know you're pretty high on it. I don't know if you're as high as I am. I just like every time I think about that film, I'm just like, it really is. If I had to create like top 10 of like my favorite films of all time, like it has to be in there. It's such a like, it's perfect. It really is. Everyone, go watch the moral of the story for Napoleon review is go watch The Village. I think
Yeah.
'Cause
I
it's
think I
incredible.
could watch that tomorrow. I could watch that tonight, and I just oh,
Oh yeah. Oh
oh
yeah.
the
I
dirty.
mean, it's so good. The filmmaking on display. If anyone is like Shyamalan's not a good filmmaking, that the hand sequence, the stabbing sequence, like it's someone at the very top of his craft. And
Yeah,
I mean, we're both Shyamalan apologists. Not to even dig our grave deeper today.
yeah,
We both stand up for Glass, but
yeah.
I mean, The
They
Village is
don't
like
know they're wrong. They
untouchable.
all know they're wrong. Come on.
Absolutely.
We'll
Especially
get
Yaka Flash. He knows. He
yeah, I
knows.
mean, sorry.
Um, going to our rapid reviews. Jack, what have you seen recently that you want to discuss quickly?
Well, I said before we started recording the podcast, I've been trying to watch some more Ridley Scott stuff coming into this. So I purposely watched The Duelist because I tried to do it for Last Dance. At Last Dance, and the Last Duel. Sorry, I didn't watch the Michael Jordan documentary. Sorry, because I feel like there's some poetic justice watching that and watching the Last Duel. But it felt really interesting to go into this because narratively, is actually set during before, during, and after the Napoleon debacle, where he's actually mentioned, which I thought was quite an interesting sort of
Mm.
idea to watch. And again, that's his debut, but you can see shades in here, the score, the idea about. I mean, you watch Harvey Keitel. I don't. Have you seen it, Carson?
I have not, sadly.
I'm not telling you here, but I'm giving you like a stern like warning here. Watch this, and this is 1977, and Harvey Keitel is Napoleon in this. The way he walks, the way he's aggressive, the way that he's 5'9" and dominates everything because he's from a background where he thinks he deserves more. It engulfs that masculinity about ego and skill, and he was doing it in 1977, and he's just done it in 2023. So it's a perfect. It's only 100 minutes as well, so it's like it's like hour less than an hour less than this, but a wonderful prelude. But I did overstep the mark, and I knew I was going to do it one day. Is that I watched Someone to Watch Over Me, like his forgotten film from 1987 with Tom Berenger and Lorraine Bracco, is it, at The Sopranos fame, and obviously Goodfellas. No, yeah. If there's one that I would never watch again, it's that. I think it's just the wrong director for the time. It's tried to be like this sensual character-driven piece between a cop who's leaving his wife to be a bodyguard for someone who's going to get murdered, and it's not really it. It's the wrong time, wrong film, wrong era, and I think it's the wrong director. It feels like a I'd say Brian De Palma vehicle more than that. And then other than that, just I watched. Actually, that's not the truth. I watched Legend as well, the Tom Cruise version. The Tom Cruise version. There's only fucking one Tom Cruise one, but I watched that, and there's a theatrical cut and a director's cut. And it's the one film that's always like it was after Blade Runner and he needed a hit and it bombed. But there's two versions. There's I think it's a 96-minute version and an hour and 53-minute. Which if you watch the Arrow video release, they've got both. If you ever want to watch Ridley Scott do Disney with just like sublime character design, sublime costume and production design. That's it. That is amazing. Tim Curry plays the devil in it. Oh, it was amazing. And then I watched just to end off. I watched Thanksgiving, the Eli Roth thing. Genuinely shocked how much I enjoyed that. But then he sort of spoiled his certain things he's starting to come out with in the public. Very strange. But those are my short things I've been watching. I'm not going to mention the other thing I watched because I don't want to do it anymore. But Thanksgiving Legends, Duelist. I've had a really good. I've been eating well. I really have. And then Napoleon. I'm full.
Hey, can't complain. I've been watching just endless films I'm not going to get through this week, but I'm going to mention a few. May December, I really enjoyed, especially due to the cast. I think it has one of the better ensembles of the year. Orlando, my political documentary, or my political biography, excuse me. I know Nick was a huge fan of this out of Berlin. I think it's one of the most important texts ever created when it comes to highlighting the trans experience and giving trans voices the experience to speak for themselves. Also, what a beautiful undercurrent here of how media and how cinema, or literature, I guess more, but how art can impact and give power to individuals from diverse perspectives. A really, really wonderful experience. The Peasants is the new film by the crew who made Loving Vincent. I thought it was good, but I really want to just say, go look into the efforts that the filmmakers, especially the branch that were working in Ukraine, put into this film. It's hand painted. Every single frame is a painting, and they had a crew in Ukraine working during the Russian invasion, and it's
Wow.
genuinely insane what they went through. They would have times where they had to crowd fund a generator to get power to the building. They had to
Wow.
deal with power outages, and they would just sit there in the cold, in the dark of a Ukraine winter, just waiting for the power to turn back on to start working again. It's really incredible that they push through and continue to work. So whether or not I think the feature is fantastic, I think that effort is speaking to the highest form of respect towards the filmmaking process. So I really got to put that out there. And then I'll be very brief on this one because we do have an episode coming eventually. I did watch Michael Mann's Ferrari. I enjoyed it. Not perfect. We'll get to it. But
Yeah.
I definitely enjoyed it. I think Penelope Cruz especially is fantastic here. Adam Driver, much more of a mixed bag. But I look forward to discussing it in about a month with you.
I can't
The
wait.
sound design, I'll say though, incredible. The sounds of those cars, it was echoing. I watched it at my house, and it was just literally rumbling my room. It was so loud, but it was so well done. Gotta love
I've seen the
it. So those
trailer.
are my rapid reviews.
I've
Yeah.
seen the trailer for that twice. I've seen it. I saw it with the previous film I watched, not I'm going to mention, and I watched it with this. I still think the trailer looks really underwhelming, but I just want to know one thing. I know that you're talking about the sound design, but is the score good for it?
Yeah, I liked it.
Great. That's all. I'll be desperate. I was going to ask Nick, but I know that he wouldn't tell me the truth. I'm glad you told me that. So one thing I'm
I really feel like you're gonna love it. That's my prediction, is that you're gonna love it. We'll see.
It's Boxing Day here, so
Um,
it's December the 26th. I don't know why I had to think of that, so I'll be there day one. I'll be there in my Michael Mann t-shirt that I haven't got, but I'll be there with my cap.
Hell yeah. um, yeah, so with that, that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you, obviously, for joining Jack and braving the storm, fresh out of Napoleon from feature to podcast. Where can we find you
Pleasure.
on social media?
No, again, thank you very much for having me on. I know you indulge, man. I know that not many people would do. So again, I really do appreciate any minute you spend with me, Cass. And so thank you very much for having me on. I can't be more thankful enough. You can find me on Twitter, on Letterboxd with the username Jak-Luke Sharp. I'm currently doing Noir November. I'm going to do a direct documentary December next month. Whole host of new stuff I'm watching. And you can find me on Clapper with a recent review of Saltburn. Yeah. I think I've got Next Goal Wins coming up, which is going to be interesting. And then I've got 2 features on the Matrix because it's the 20th anniversary, which frightens me to death. But yeah, I very much exciting time back into the writing, back into Christmas. Yeah, that's where you can find me. You can read my nonsensical thoughts on cinema.
Hey, you got to get those Matrix articles out.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
it's
know.
been a while.
You
The
know,
anniversary is going to pass
yeah, I
eventually. We
I
got
actually
to.
missed the actual day of Revolutions as well, and it came up. Total Film reminded me, which was like, you bastards. Yeah, I'll get them out. I'll get them. I will do. I'm very
Waiting.
defensive of them. I'm very defensive of them.
No, I can't wait for
No
them.
one shits on them, which I was the name. Sorry, I won't have it.
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at pp_movie reviews, Letterboxd just Carson Tamar. Thank you so much for watching / listening. A very busy time on the podcast as we go through award season and just an onslaught of new releases. We had a bonus episode where me and Paul reviewed Saltburn. Go watch it. I mean, if I had to sit through the movie, I think it's only fair you sit through the podcast. We had our Hunger Games review, obviously.
Yes.
Next month, we have a lot of stuff happening. Me and Nick are reviewing Poor Things. Me and Michael are reviewing The Boy and the Heron. We'll be back to talk about Wonka. We'll be back to talk about Ferrari. We'll be back to talk about Rebel Moon. I kind of forgot that was on the agenda until I just looked. We will review it, you know? And with that, we'll see you guys next time on the podcast. Thank you so much. Goodbye.